Hello everyone. This presentation is intended to provide a logical framework for the immediate adoption of a community-led buyers club for heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine in BC. I am presenting this on behalf of the Drug User Liberation Front, also known as DULF. Drug User Liberation Front is an unincorporated coalition of community-based drug user organizations, concerned community members, and allied organizations. DULF is operated entirely by community volunteers and all actions are funded through private donations. DULF's sole mission is to provide tangible responses to the devastating overdose crisis in BC and Canada. The first thing I would like to do is frame the current situation and assumptions that underlie the need for immediate action. When I say assumptions, I mean that these are well-known and accepted facts among people who use drugs in the larger harm reduction ecosystem in British Columbia, including drug user groups. The situation in BC is that we are in a declared opioid overdose emergency and overdose deaths are higher than ever. And despite massive efforts and resources dedicated to reducing the availability of drugs, anyone who wants drugs can easily find them. Put succinctly, the war on drugs has failed. Next, as long as the illicit market is allowed to function unchecked, it will evolve towards more potent and addictive substances that will lead to increased overdose deaths and other substance-related harms. In response to these realities, the BC Centre on Substance Use conducted an in-depth analysis of the current situation and put forward the evidence-based model for heroin compassion clubs and recommended their immediate trial. This was 2 years ago and no action has been taken. As for our assumptions, we are assuming that the government defines addiction as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking, continued use despite harmful consequences, and long-lasting changes in the brain. It is considered both a complex brain disorder and a mental illness. Following this reason, it is only logical to assume that people in active addiction will continue to use regardless of legality or circumstances of risk. We assume that the inconsistency and unknown potency are major contributors to the overdose deaths, in that it is not uncommon for the unregulated street opiates to range in fentanyl concentrations from 5 to 40% without reliable and accessible ways for people who use drugs to differentiate potency. Finally, we believe that it is the moral obligation of the public and public health actors to intervene when the government will not implement evidence-based policies and solutions to a public health emergency. While the government has taken small steps to providing safer supply, it is important to note that these were implemented as a response to COVID-19, not overdose. As a result, they were misguided, largely inaccessible to people who use drugs, and doctors were generally unwilling to prescribe. Meanwhile, harm reductionists and people who use drugs were watching new crises develop in the unregulated illicit drug market. Most recently, benzodiazepines have been cut into the opiate supply, leading to unintentional dependence and addiction to the new substance, and increased risks of overdose and substance-related harms. Increasing frequency and severity of infections and sporadic introductions of carfentanil, an opiate 100 times more potent than fentanyl, have also been observed. This April 14th will mark the 5th anniversary of the declared opioid overdose emergency in British Columbia, while also following the most deadly year on record for overdose deaths. If not us, then who? The Drug User Liberation Front is stepping up and taking on tremendous personal risk to carry out a necessary act of humanity by operating an episodic cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine compassion club. We are demonstrating that compassion clubs can be effectively run by community and if allowed to operate will save lives from overdose and reduce substance-related harms. We are also demanding that the appropriate levels of government take action to innovate in its harm reduction response by either granting us the sanctioning and/or exemptions we need to save lives, or take real action to implement evidence-based compassion club models. The community-led compassion clubs will reduce harms and save lives for the following but not limited reasons. The club is able to provide quality control checkpoints to check for dangerous cuts, buffs, and adulterants. Second, the club is able to provide clear and accurate labeling and packaging for substances including ingredients, potency, and dissuasion warnings of addiction and risk of bodily harm or death. Third, the club facilitates connection to community, which is a key social determinant of health, and facilitates innovation in community to care for one another. Fourth, the club's centralized purchasing increases consumer power to demand clean drugs at fairer prices. Fifth, the club acts as a connection to the other harm reduction services and treatment or recovery services. This is important because these clubs will be able to reach a population that other initiatives cannot. Sixth, a portion of the funds are diverted from the illicit market, which can be used to bolster mental health and substance use services. Admittedly, this effect is small when compassion clubs are dependent on illicit markets, but if pharmaceutical-grade substances were provided, compassion clubs would have a significant effect. And to top all of this off, the BCCSU Compassion Club model explains that this model does not undermine efforts to promote cultural changes and the demand for drugs, and in fact may actually reduce interest in opiates among high-risk populations. The logistics for unsanctioned operation of compassion clubs has 5 components. These are membership assessment, market navigation, quality control, packaging and labeling, and distribution. The membership assessment will be conducted by an existing DULF volunteer. Offers of membership will be at the assessor's discretion. The 2 requirements for membership are that the participant is over 18 years old and has previously used illicit drugs. Market navigation. In an ideal situation, we would be able to provide pharmaceutical-grade substances. However, circumstances require the club to use either existing community connections to access substances or use internet-based drug markets, which could introduce an additional level of regulation into the operation by providing an Amazon-like service where purchasers can leave reviews of products and read other reviews. This method would increase the safety of the club and help provide a consistent supply. For quality control, we will access existing drug checking services offered by Get Your Drugs Checked, the BCCSU, and Vancouver Coastal Health, among others. Utilizing drug checking services in this manner exponentially increases the reach and impact of drug checking services. After being checked and proving to have no detectable cuts or adulterants of relative harm, the information is transcribed onto simple labeling, including ingredients and their approximate quantities. These labels will also include warnings of the substance's addictive properties and potential for bodily harm and impairment. Due to resource restrictions, the packaging will be simple, but with funding we could implement packaging with safety features. Inside the packaging will be an information slip explaining the limitations of the drug checking technologies we use and urges people to use at an overdose prevention site or with friends. For distribution, the substances will be provided to club members at cost. The substances to be distributed at the April 14th action were obtained through private donations, so they will be provided free of cost. In a sustained model, the price would mirror illicit market prices due to our dependence on them. However, as stated earlier, bulk purchasing by the club allows for premium pricing options. We truly wish that we did not have to operate in this fashion. We are not criminals. We are deeply concerned citizens, people who use drugs, academics, professionals, and organizations. We are doing the best we can with the resources and mechanisms available to us to save lives and survive. The DULF model is not perfect. It clearly is not a solution to addiction or all substance-related harms, but it is a logical approach to implement a degree of safety into an extremely dangerous environment. Finally, history has shown that the most impactful harm reduction innovation sparks from civil disobedience of community drug user groups. Without actions such as this, we would not have overdose prevention sites, supervised injection sites, needle exchanges, and many other core harm reduction programs. It is my hope that this presentation has provided you with a better understanding of the current state of the overdose emergency in BC and provides a solid argument for why we cannot continue to watch passively from the sidelines. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this presentation.